Book 7, Part 2 of The Art of War by Niccolò Machiavelli, translated by Henry Neville. Recording by Clive Catterall. Book 7, Part 2. I do not want to miss telling you that what makes defending a city or an encampment difficult is to have to keep all the forces you have in them disunited. For the enemy, being able altogether to assault you at his discretion, you must keep every place guarded on all sides, and thus he assaults you with his entire force, and you defend it with part of yours. The besieged can also be completely overcome, while those outside cannot unless repulsed. Whence many who have been besieged, either in their encampment or in a town, although inferior in strength, have suddenly issued forth with all their forces, and have overcome the enemy. Marcellus did this at Nola, and Caesar did this in Gaul, when his encampment, being assaulted by the great number of Gauls, and seeing he could not defend it without having to divide these forces into several parts, and unable to stay within the stockade with the driving attack of the enemy, opened the encampment on one side, and turning to that side with all his forces, attacked them with such fury and with such virtue that he overcame and defeated them. The constancy of the besieged has also often displeased and dismayed the besieger. And when Pompey was affronting Caesar, and Caesar's army was suffering greatly from hunger, some of his bread was brought to Pompey, who, seeing it made of grass, commanded it not to be shown to his army, in order not to frighten it, seeing what kind of enemies he had to encounter. Nothing gave the Romans more honour in the war against Hannibal as their constancy. For, in whatever more inimical and adverse fortune, they never asked for peace, and never gave any sign for fear. Rather, when Hannibal was around Rome, those fields on which he had situated his quarters were sold at a higher price than they would ordinarily have been sold in other times. And they were so obstinate in their enterprise that, to defend Rome, they did not leave off attacking Capua, which was being besieged by the Romans at the same time Rome was being besieged. I know that I have spoken to you of many things which you have been able to understand and consider by yourselves. None the less, I have done this, as I also told you today, to be able to show you through them the better kind of training, and also to satisfy those, if there should be any, who had not had the opportunity to learn as you have. Nor does it appear to me there is anything left for me to tell you other than some general rules, with which you should be very familiar, which are these: what benefits the enemy harms you, and what benefits you harms the enemy. Whoever is more vigilant in observing the designs of the enemy in war, and ensures much hardship in training his army, will incur fewer dangers, and can have greater hope for victory. Never lead your soldiers into an engagement unless you are assured of their courage, know they are without fear, and are organized, and never make an attempt unless you see they hope for victory. It is better to defeat the enemy by hunger than with steel. In such victory fortune counts more than virtue. No proceeding is better than that which you have concealed from the enemy until the time you have executed it. To know how to recognize an opportunity in war and take it benefits you more than anything else. Nature creates few men brave. Industry and training makes many. Discipline in war counts for more than fury. If some on the side of the enemy desert to come to your service, if they be loyal, they will always make you a great acquisition. For the forces of the adversary diminish more with the loss of those who flee than those who are killed, even though the name of the fugitives is suspect to the new friends and odious to the old. It is better in organizing an engagement to reserve great aid behind the front line than to spread out your soldiers to make a greater front. He is overcome with difficulty who knows how to recognize his forces and those of the enemy. The virtue of the soldiers is worth more than a multitude, and the sight is often of more benefit than virtue. New and speedy things frighten armies, while the customary and slow things are esteemed little by them. You will therefore make your army experienced, and learn the strength of a new enemy by skirmishes before you come to an engagement with him. Whoever pursues a routed enemy in a disorganized manner does nothing but become vanquished from having been a victor. Whoever does not make provisions necessary to live or eat is overcome without steel. Whoever trusts more in cavalry than in infantry, or more in infantry than in cavalry, must settle for the location. If you want to see whether any spy has come into the camp during the day, have no one go to his quarters. Change your proceeding when you become aware that the enemy has foreseen it. Counsel with many on the things you ought to do, and confer with few on what you do afterwards. When soldiers are confined to their quarters, they are kept there by fear or punishment. Then, when they are led by war, they are led by hope and reward. Good captains never come to an engagement unless necessity compels them or the opportunity calls them. Act so your enemies do not know how you want to organize your army for battle, and in whatever way you organize them, arrange it so that the first line can be received by the second and by the third. In a battle, never use a company for some other purpose than what you have assigned it to, unless you want to cause disorder. Accidents are remedied with difficulty unless you quickly take the facility of thinking. Men, steel, money, and bread are the sinews of war, but of these four the first two are more necessary, for men and steel can find money and bread, but money and bread do not find men and steel. The unarmed rich man is the prize of the poor soldier. Accustom your soldiers to despise delicate living and luxurious clothing. This is as much as occurs to me generally to remind you, and I know I could have told you of many other things in my discussion, for example, how and in how many ways the ancients organized their ranks, how they dressed, and how they trained in many other things, and to give you many other particulars, which I have not judged necessary to narrate, as much because you are able to see them, as because my intention has not been to show you in detail how the ancient army was created, but how an army should be organized in these times, which should have more virtue than they now have. Whence it does not please me to discuss the ancient matters further than those I have judged necessary to such an introduction. I know I should have enlarged more on the cavalry, and also on naval warfare, for whoever defines the military says that it is an army on land and on the sea, on foot and on horseback. Of naval matters I will not presume to talk, not because of not being informed, but because I should leave the talk to the Genoese and Venetians, who have made much study of it, and have done great things in the past. Of the cavalry I also do not want to say anything other than what I have said above, this part being, as I said, less corrupted. In addition to this, if the infantry, who are the nerve of the army, are well organized, of necessity it happens that good cavalry be created. I would only remind you that whoever organizes the military in his country so as to fill the quota of cavalry should make two provisions. The one, that he should distribute horses of good breed throughout his countryside, and accustom his men to make a round-up of fillies, as you do in this country with calves and mules. The other, so that the round-up men find a buyer, I would prohibit anyone to keep mules who did not keep a horse, so that whoever wanted to keep a mount only would be constrained to keep a horse. And in addition, none should be able to dress in silk except whoever keeps a horse. I understand this arrangement has been done by some princes of our times, and to have resulted in an excellent cavalry being produced in their countries in very brief time. About other things, how much should be expected from the cavalry, I will go back to what I have said to you today, and to that which is the custom. Perhaps you will also desire to learn what parts a captain ought to have. In this I will satisfy you in a brief manner, for I would not knowingly select any other man than one who should know how to do all those things we have discussed today. and these would still not be enough for him if he did not know how to find them out by himself, for no one without imagination was ever very great in his profession, and if imagination makes for honour in other things, it will above all honour you in this one. And it is to be observed that every creation, even though minor, is celebrated by the writers, as is seen where they praised Alexander the Great, who, in order to break camp more secretly, did not give the signal with the trumpet, but with a hat on the end of a lance. He is also praised for having ordered his soldiers, when coming to battle with the enemy, to kneel with the left knee, so that they could more strongly withstand the attack of the enemy, which not only gave him victory, but also so much praise that all the statues erected in his honour show him in that pose. But as it is time to finish this discussion, I want to return to the subject, and so in part escape that penalty which in this town custom decrees for those who do not return. If you remember well, Cosimo, you said to me that I was, on the one hand, an exalter of antiquity and a censurer of those who do not imitate them in serious matters, and on the other hand, in matters of war, in which I worked very hard, I did not imitate them. You were unable to discover the reason. To that I replied that men who want to do something must first prepare themselves to know how to do it, in order to be able afterwards to do it when the occasion permits it. Whether or not I would know how to bring the army to the ancient ways, I would rather you be the judge, who have heard me discuss on this subject at length. Whence you have been able to know how much time I have consumed on these thoughts, and I also believe you should be able to imagine how much desire there is in me to put them into effect, which you can guess if I was ever able to do it, or if ever the opportunity was given to me. Yet to make you more certain, and for my greater justification, I would like also to cite you the reasons, and in part will observe what I promised you, to show you the ease and the difficulty that are present in such imitation. I say to you, therefore, that no activity among men today is easier to restore to its ancient ways than the military. But for those only who are princes of so large a state, they are able to assemble 15,000 or 20,000 young men from their subjects. On the other hand, nothing is more difficult than this to those who do not have such convenience. And because I want you to understand this part better, you have to know that captains praised are of two kinds. The one includes those who, with an army well ordered through its own natural discipline, have done great things, such as were the greater part of the Roman citizens, and others who have led armies who have not had any hardship in maintaining them good, and to see to it they were safely led. The other includes those who not only had to overcome the enemy, but before they came to this had been compelled to make their army good and well ordered, and who without doubt deserve greater praise than those others merited who, with an army which was naturally good, have acted with so much virtue. Such as these were Pelopidas, Epaminondas, Tullus Hostilius, Philip of Macedonia, father of Alexander, and Cyrus, king of the Persians, and Gracchus the Roman. All these had first to make the army good, and then fight with it. All of these were able to do so as much by their prudence as by having subjects capable of being directed in such practices. Nor would it have been possible for any of them to accomplish any praiseworthy deed, no matter how good and excellent they might have been, should they have been in an alien country, full of corrupt men and not accustomed to sincere obedience. It is not enough, therefore, in Italy, to govern an army already trained, but it is necessary first to know how to do it, and then how to command it. And of these there need to be those princes who, because they have a large state and many subjects, have the opportunity to accomplish this, of whom I cannot be one, for I have never commanded, nor can I command except armies of foreigners, and men obligated to others and not to me. Whether or not it is possible to introduce into those princes some of the things we discussed today, I want to leave to your judgment. Would I make one of those soldiers who practice today carry more arms than is customary, and in addition food for 2 or 3 days and a shovel? Should I make him dig, or keep many hours every day under arms in feigned exercises, so that in real battles afterwards he would be of value to me? Would they abstain from gambling, lasciviousness, swearing, and insolence, which they do daily? Would they be brought to so much discipline, obedience, and respect, that a tree full of apples, which should be found in the midst of an encampment, would be left intact, as is read happened many times in the ancient armies? What can I promise them by which they will respect, love, or fear me, when, with the war ended, they no longer must come to me for anything? Of what can I make them ashamed who are born and brought up without shame? By what deity or saints do I make them take an oath? By those they adore, or by those they curse? I do not know any whom they adore, but I well know that they curse them all. How can I believe they will observe the promises to those men for whom they show their contempt hourly? How can those who depreciate God have reverence for men? What good customs, therefore, is it possible to instil in such people? And if you should tell me the Swiss and the Spaniards are good, I should confess they are far better than the Italians. But if you will note my discussion, and the ways in which both proceed, you will see that there are still many things among the Swiss and Spaniards to bring them up to the perfection of the ancients. And the Swiss have been good from their natural customs, for the reasons I have told you today, and the Spaniards from necessity. For when they fight in a foreign country, it seems to them they are constrained to win or die, and as no place appeared to them where they might flee, they became good. But it is a goodness defective in many parts, for there is nothing good in them except that they are accustomed to wait the enemy up to the point of the pike and of the sword. Nor would there be anyone suitable to teach them what they lack, and much less anyone who does not speak their language. But let us turn to the Italians, who, because they have not wise princes, have not produced any good army, and because they did not have the necessity that the Spaniards had, have not undertaken it by themselves, so that they remain the shame of the world. And the people are not to blame, but their princes are, who have been castigated, and by their ignorance have received a just punishment, ignominiously losing the state, and without any show of virtue. Do you want to see if what I tell you is true? Consider how many wars have been waged in Italy from the passage of King Charles of France until today. And wars usually make men warlike and acquire reputations. These, as much as they have been great and cruel, so much more have caused its members and its leaders to lose reputation. This necessarily points out that the customary orders were not and are not good, and there is no one who knows how to take up the new orders. Nor do you ever believe that reputation will be acquired by Italian arms except in the manner I have shown, and by those who have large states in Italy, for this custom can be instilled in men who are simple, rough, and your own, but not to men who are malignant, have bad habits, and are foreigners. And a good sculptor will never be found who believes he can make a beautiful statue from a piece of poorly shaped marble, even though it may be a rough one. Our Italian princes, before they tasted the blows of the Ultramontane wars, believed it was enough for them to know what was written, think of a cautious reply, or write a beautiful letter, show wit and promptness in his sayings and in his words, know how to weave a deception, ornament himself with gems and gold, sleep and eat with greater splendor than others, keep many lascivious persons around, conduct himself avariciously and haughtily towards his subjects, become rotten with idleness, hand out military ranks at his will, express contempt for anyone who may have demonstrated any praiseworthy manner, want their words should be the responses of oracles. Nor were these little men aware that they were preparing themselves to be the prey of anyone who assaulted them. From this, then, in the year 1494, there arose the great frights, the sudden flights, and the miraculous losses, and those most powerful states of Italy were several times sacked and despoiled in this manner. But what is worse is that those who remained persist in the same error, and exist in the same disorder, and they do not consider that those who held the state anciently had done all those things we discussed, and that they concentrated on preparing the body for hardships and the mind not to be afraid of danger. Whence it happened that Caesar, Alexander, and all those excellent men and princes were first among the combatants, went around on foot, and even if they did lose their state, wanted also to lose their lives, so that they lived and died with virtue. And if they, or part of them, could be accused of having too much ambition to rule, there never could be found in them any softness or anything to condemn which makes men delicate and cowardly. If these things were to be read and believed by these princes, it would be impossible that they would not change their way of living, and their countries not change in fortune. And as in the beginning of our discussion you complained of your organization, I tell you, if you had organized it as we discussed above, and it did not give a good account for itself, then you would have reason to complain. But if it is not organized and trained as I have said, the army can have reason to complain of you, who have made an abortion and not a perfect organization. The Venetians also and the Duke of Ferrara began it, but did not pursue it, which was due to their fault and not of their men. And I affirm to now that any of them who have states in Italy today will begin in this way, he will be the lord higher than any other in this province, and it will happen to his state as happened to the kingdom of the Macedonians, which, coming under Philip, who had learned the manner of organizing the armies from Epaminondas the Theban, became, with these arrangements and practices, while the rest of Greece was in idleness and attending to reciting comedies, so powerful that in a few years he was able to occupy it completely, and leave such a foundation to his son that he was able to make himself prince of the entire world. Whoever disparages these thoughts, therefore, if he be a prince, disparages his principality, and if he be a citizen, his city. And I complain of nature, which either ought to make me a recognizer of this, or ought to have given me the faculty of being able to pursue it. Nor, even today, when I am old, do I think I have the opportunity. And because of this, I have been liberal with you, who, being young and qualified, when the things I have said please you, could, at the proper time, in favour of your princes, aid and counsel them. I do not want you to be afraid or mistrustful of this, because this country appears to be destined to resuscitate the things that are dead, as has been observed with poetry, painting, and sculpture. But as for waiting for me, because of my years, do not rely on it. And truly, if in the past fortune had conceded to me what would have sufficed for such an enterprise, I believe I would, in a very brief time, have shown the world how much the ancient institutions were of value, and without doubt I would have enlarged it with glory, or would have lost it without shame. End of Book 7, Part 2. End of The Art of War, by Niccolò Machiavelli. Read by Clive Catterall.